Hey, this is Pastoring in the Digital Parish, your resource and point of connection for building digital ministry strategy and bringing your congregation into the digital age. What are you reading? Has there been a book or two that have informed your practice of digital ministry? In this session, I'm sharing some recommended books for digital and online ministry. Many of these come from my own reading. A few come from our community of listeners and contributors, which of course you can jump into this community too. We'd love to have you. Find us on Facebook at the Pastoring in the Digital Parish group. As I made this list of recommendations, I did impose a few rules. First, no books from authors that have already been on the podcast. I've assembled a list of these books as well. They're viewable in the show notes on this episode. Of course, they're all recommended. They just have already been brought to the light of day here, so I wanted to give some fresh takes. Second rule was I didn't want to go for anything too obvious. I could have easily said, hey, you need to read Nona Jones's From Social Media to Social Ministry, but that's not something that you actually really need advice to read. Just read it. Right now, it's kind of like the textbook for building a digital ministry. And with that in mind, I really tried to move away from books that are explicitly how-tos on digital ministry. There are several great books in that realm, and I'll link those in the notes as well. But again, a search is going to reveal those. I wanted to go beyond the search and get a bit on the fringe of digital ministry. So let's roll with it. Books for your digital ministry toolkit. Number one, I'm going to start out there and then kind of tighten the aperture around digital ministry. So my book that is out there is called The Tangible Kingdom. It's by Hugh, Halter, and Smay. It was published in 2008. So you can figure out just from that it's not really into digital ministry. I don't think that Facebook was a pervasive thing yet in 2008, and we didn't all have smartphones. It was a different age. But why it's relevant here, though, is that it invites a missional mindset. This was, in fact, my gateway, so to speak, for thinking about a ministry that moves towards people as opposed to building a ministry that invites people towards it. It's one of the early books of the missional ministry movement, which really reframes ministry from asking questions about, well, how do we get people to show up, and moves us towards asking, how are we showing up for people? And so even though this book is older, it poses ideas that are incredibly relevant to today's digital ministry landscape, because I'll tell you, most of the questions I hear asked in the digital ministry world still revolve around the how do we get people to show up question. And we probably need to check ourselves back a bit in thinking about how we're showing up for people, even digitally. Asking that question moves us towards expressing ministry in some really creative ways. And this book has a lot of great stories in that realm, so it makes for a really entertaining read. Again, that's the Tangible Kingdom by Halter and Smay. Book number two, it's kind of along the same lines. It comes from a community contributor and a recent collaborator. His name is Shane Russo. He was on our last episode. He recommends Thomas Oord's God Can't, because it deals with topics that he finds many of the people who he's meeting through digital ministry are dealing with. Specifically, it deals with the problem of evil. And Shane says this, which I have found is the biggest roadblock for people I meet online. When I was looking at the reviews, one noted that this book was a 1 in terms of difficulty, meaning that it's really easy to read, which is quite impressive considering the topic. It's tough to wrestle with evil. In terms of moving to where people are, theological books like this are helpful because they act as a form of social listening, where we get a sense of the questions that people are actually asking and the kind of content then that we can create that comes alongside them in the midst of their questioning. Of course, we learned all about social listening last season, right? In our episode with Nelson Musanda, that's titled Evangelism Through Social Listening. It's all about becoming internet trolls of grace. Anyways, the book here again is God Can't by Thomas Oord. Book number 3, let's talk content. Recommendation number 3 is called Master Content Strategy. It's by Pamela Wilson. And I'm so glad that we did this episode, if for no other reason than it brought me back to this book, which is really important in my professional line of work, where I am, in essence, a digital content creator. But if you're in digital ministry, I'm going to let you in on the secret. You're a digital content creator too. At some point, you are creating pieces of information that will interact with people asynchronously. This is stuff that lives in perpetuity in the digital realm. Well, this book, Master Content Strategy, is all about a strategy that organizes the content we create. It provides purpose behind it, and it helps us clarify who it's for, and then helps us decipher where this content lives. Do you feel like there is a map or purpose behind the content you create? This book really helps to flesh out a sense of purpose and direction and setting a relationship map for the people we're reaching in digital ministry. Again, it's Master Content Strategy by Pamela Wilson. Book number 4, both a community recommendation and one that I can vouch for. It's called The Art of Community. It's by Charles Vogl. I've witnessed a resistance to creating and cultivating a specific culture of community within the church. And this resistance, I believe, actually comes from a good place. We don't want to turn people off or make them feel like outsiders. And that's good because everyone for sure has a place in the kingdom of God. However, communities actually thrive on definition. So the trick for us as commencers of community revolves around creating access for new initiates or community members. For example, how accessible do we make the rituals of our community for new people? Rituals are a part of community life, and there's a good chance that your community has rituals, whether you've named them or not. We don't need to move away from these rituals. Our challenge instead is to make them easily understandable and accessible. Well, Vogel's book shares several ideas regarding what builds a community's identity and how we make these communities accessible to the uninitiated. It's super useful stuff. And I got a big kick out of trying to discern the ways that we can translate our community rituals into virtual or digital space. So again, that book is The Art of Community by Charles Vogl. Book number 5, it's called Contagious. It's a community recommendation, specifically from Jessica Blackwood. Contagious is by Jonah Berger. Says Jessica, quote, "I find it fascinating why some things take off and others don't. Contagious speaks to how and why some ideas catch fire and others burn out. I use it as a grounding book when I move too far away from practical ministry." The lesson here, I suspect, is providing people with a sense that they are in on something. And what makes an idea, product, or community contagious then is that people have a wish to bring others in on the item or community as well. I'm going to have to take a look at this one. It's Contagious by Jonah Berger. Book number 6 is called How to Handle a Crowd by Anika Gupta. The premise of the book is this. Anika Gupta interviewed a bunch of social media community moderators and admins. What we get are some great stories about how to get people engaged and talking in digital spaces, how to navigate conflict and arguments, and some awesome inspiration around the kinds of groups that draw people together. Did you know that there's a whole vibrant online community that centers around sharing city planning and mass transit memes? That's awesome, right? Certainly there's room for our crazy community ideas here as well. Also, we get an idea of how we can utilize the MMO games that we play to connect with people. And even the YouTube comments section. All kinds of little gems are in there. Oh, and a look at the fetish community. There's nothing explicit discussed, and you can always skip that chapter if you're worried about it, but I would recommend reading it because it teaches us a lot regarding the life cycles of some online communities. We're up to number 7. It's another community recommendation. It's called Another Way, Living and Leading Change on Purpose. It's by Stephen Lewis, Matthew Wesley Williams, and Dori Grinenko Baker. I am always amazed at how people are able to collaborate on books like this. Like, that's quite an impressive list of authors. And incidentally, Dori Baker was one of my professors for a youth ministry class way back in the early aughts up at Garrett Seminary. Her earlier book, Girlfriend Theology, is definitely niched, but I found the story development process that it describes to be universally imitatable. I actually ended up utilizing it at some youth retreats that culminated in young people developing and sharing some inspirational testimonies. And I bring that up because I suspect that this same kind of story development is at work in the Another Way book. One reader noted that the book is a collection of enlightening exercises for leadership and visioning. The book definitely invites us back into considerations about hospitality, which I'm finding is increasingly important in digital ministry. Since we generally have so many entry points in the digital world, it's hard to identify really a process through which people get immersed in the culture of our community. This book may provide some exercises for imagining our own paths through that process. All right, book number 8 is called Viral by Leonard Sweet. My goodness, you want to know a human being who can put away a serious amount of coffee. It is Leonard Sweet. He did some consulting for a church that I served with, and I found myself somewhat stunned by his ability to double fist Starbucks ventis with extra shots. I mean, maybe that was just a season in his life, but it also helps explain his significant intellectual output. It's funny, though, because when you hear him talk, he does not strike you as someone who's humming on a boatload of caffeine. Anyways, the book, simply put, provides clarity around the ins and outs of digital relationship building, especially across generations. Len Sweet here separates people into 2 categories, the Gutenbergers and the Googlers. And then he notes the values and assumptions of each category. I feel like there's a lot of psychological qualification in this book, especially around what it is that hits in digital spaces. And Dr. Sweet sums it up really well in this quote. He says, "They want to share life with others. They do not seek a spirituality that escapes the flesh and blood." The idea here is that digital spaces become avenues for us to share life with one another. And I guess that's kind of a bridge between the tangible kingdom and books like Contagious. Our challenge or our calling as digital ministers is to create avenues for individuals to share life with disciples. All right, last book on our list is another community recommendation. I think I pulled this one from community member and collaborator Nathan Webb. It's number 9. It's called The Startup Community Way, Evolving an Entrepreneurial Ecosystem. It's by Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway. The key to starting a startup company, it seems, is to start with community. And of course, that's what we're concerned with as well. The book seems to expend quite a bit of energy on building trust amidst a community. And again, I think that's relevant for our sphere of work as well, as we endeavor to build communities of faith that have to overcome a trust problem. For those outside of faith communities, trust is an issue. The popular narrative of faith communities is that they've abused trust. We have reports of abuse cover-ups, of misappropriation of funds, really all kinds of harms being perpetrated. So establishing trust is a key component for overcoming that narrative and then drawing people into relationship with our communities. So let's get reading and let's get to work. There's a lot of good work to be done. I've found some more books to add to my reading list through this whole process. I hope that you have as well. Don't forget to keep listening, though, too. The Pastoring in the Digital Parish podcast is full of ideas and stories for expanding your online community. A good follow-up to this episode is one called Understanding Our Online Behavior with Dr. Kelly Price that was released in December of 2021. I think that was part of season 2. Also, way back in season 1, in June of 2021 to be exact, we did an episode called The Why of Continuing in Digital Ministry with Will Ranney. It's good to go back to the reasons of what we do. Again, my name is Ryan Dunn. I'd like to thank resourceumc.org, the online destination for leaders throughout the United Methodist Church. They make this podcast possible. And of course, they host our website, pastoringinthedigitalparish.com, where you can find more online resources for ministry. If you want to connect, again, check out our Pastoring in the Digital Parish group on Facebook. You can also send me questions and ideas for future sessions or episodes at digitalparish@umcom.org. Another session comes out next week. In the meantime, peace.